Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. There are some students who grow up surrounded by opportunity, so thoroughly that college going feels less like a leap and more like the next obvious step. They hear about campuses in casual conversation. They know people who have gone away to school. They absorb, almost without realizing it, the sense that a wide range of futures is already available to them. And then there are the students for whom that horizon is much harder to see. And that difference has been on my mind as I've learned more about the work of the STARS College Network. Because what stands out to me is that this is not simply a story about college access in the usual sense. It's also a story about aspiration. And more specifically, it's a story about aspiration gaps and why they matter so much for students in small towns and rural communities. We often talk about gaps in education in terms of test scores, funding, technology, or coursework. Those are real and they deserve attention. But aspiration gaps can be quieter than that. They show up when students have talent but not enough visibility into what is possible. They show up when students have ambition, but not enough invitation. And they show up when a young person begins to wonder not simply what colleges are out there, but whether any of those places are truly meant for someone like them. That, to me, is where this conversation becomes especially important. Because the problem is not that rural students lack ability. It's not like they lack discipline, curiosity, or seriousness about their future. In fact, the STARS materials tell a very different story. They point to students who bring resilience, independence, empathy, perspective, groundedness, and a strong sense of community with them. The challenge is that many of these students are navigating a thinner opportunity infrastructure. They may have fewer chances to interact with colleges in person. They may have fewer examples nearby of people who have pursued certain pathways. They may have fewer moments of what STARS calls incidental brushes with higher education. And those things matter more than we sometimes admit, because information is never just information. Exposure is never just exposure. When students repeatedly encounter a world of opportunity, it becomes easier to picture themselves within it. But when those pathways feel distant, abstract, or culturally unfamiliar, aspiration can begin to feel narrow. Not because the student has less potential, but because the future itself feels less legible. And I think one of the most revealing things about STARS is the way students describe their own college search process. One student says it was, quote, mostly me with my computer. Others describe trying to figure out things alone with limited local knowledge and information about out-of-state options or less selective familiarity with a broad range of schools. That's a powerful reminder that for some students, the college search is not guided by a robust network of exposure and advice. It can feel isolating, improvised, and uncertain. I think about my own college exploration journey as a first-generation college student in a rural high school. Despite being one of the valedictorians, I had all of one meeting with a guidance counselor. One of my closest friends who has gone on to become a successful journalist wanted to go out of state, but was told, "Are you sure you don't want to apply to a few more safety schools?" And I think that's why I find the work of the STARS College Network so compelling. STARS, the Small Town and Rural Student College Network, brings together 32 colleges and universities working to widen higher education pathways for students from rural and small town communities. Its work includes rural outreach visits, virtual programming, workshops on applications and financial aid, free fly-in opportunities, virtual college fairs, support for school counselors and advisors, and on-campus efforts to help students persist once they enroll. And all of that matters on a practical level. Students need help understanding how college works, what it costs, what fit means, and how to navigate a process that can feel overwhelming even under ideal circumstances. But what I think makes STARS especially interesting is that it's doing something deeper than simply handing students more brochures or expanding a list of names. It's sending a message. And the message is this: you are wanted here. Okay, that may sound simple, but I don't think it's small, because in a competitive educational landscape, students can very easily assume that the most ambitious spaces belong to other people. They may look at highly selective colleges, flagship universities, or prestigious programs and conclude that those places are for students from larger schools, more affluent communities, or family systems with more experience navigating higher education. And even when nobody says that out loud, students can absorb it all the same. So I think there's a real power in institutions making the opposite message visible. That's where the real power in a college or university showing up in a rural community and saying, not only do we want you to know about this opportunity, we want you to know that you would matter here. We want what you bring. We value your experience, your perspective, your place-based knowledge, and the strengths you've developed in the community that raised you. And I don't think that's charity. I think it's recognition. And it is recognition also grounded in truth. Rural students often bring qualities to a campus that are deeply needed. They know what community feels like. They often know what it means to contribute, to adapt, to carry responsibility, and to live with a stronger awareness of interdependence. They may arrive with a groundedness that comes from place, from family, from work, and from the practical realities of life in communities where people tend to know one another more fully. And I think STARS reflects that well, and it's one of the strongest features of this work in that it does not frame rural students primarily in terms of deficits. And still, those strengths do not eliminate the need for aspiration to be nurtured, because aspiration rarely grows in a vacuum. It grows through repeated signals. It grows when someone opens a door. It grows when students can see a future before they're asked to choose it. And it grows when institutions are willing to travel toward students rather than students being assumed to know how they'll navigate that journey alone. And I think the story from a Beaufort, Missouri student captures this beautifully. The student describes growing up in a small town where people knew each other well and where there was real care and support, but also a sense that aiming for something like an Ivy League school could invite skepticism or laughter. The student noted about clearly having to convince herself not to pursue that path because it felt as though no one cared, and then seeing opportunities like this and being reminded that, you know what, someone else did. And that's such a great insight, because sometimes aspiration gaps are not created by hostility. Sometimes they're created by absence. By the absence of exposure, by the absence of reinforcement, and by the absence of enough people saying with conviction, yes, this future is possible for you. And this matters not only for individual students, but for the future of rural communities themselves. According to the National Rural Education Association's Why Rural Matters 2025 report, more than 9.7 million students attend public rural schools in the U.S., and roughly only 1 in 5 American students attend a rural school. Now, rural America is not peripheral to the nation's future. It's still very much central to it. And at the same time, the long-term economic stakes are changing. Georgetown's Center on Education and the Workforce projects that by 2031, 72% of jobs will require some form of post-secondary education or training, while 43% will require at least a bachelor's degree. So that does not mean that every student should pursue the same path, but it does mean that helping students connect talent to opportunity is increasingly important for mobility, for workforce participation, and for the long-term vitality of communities. But even there, I think it's important to be careful with the framing. Helping rural students aspire should not mean teaching them to reject where they came from. It should not mean treating hometown as places to escape. It is, at its best, the work doing something much more thoughtful than that. It widens the horizon without dismissing the place. It helps students imagine larger possibilities while still honoring the communities that shaped them. And the STARS work reflects that as well, including the importance of building pathways that can ultimately connect students back to their communities and regions. And that feels exactly right to me. Because the goal is not simply to help students leave. The goal is to help them see, to help them understand that geography should not become destiny, to help them realize that talent from a small town is still talent, that ambition formed in a rural place is still ambition, and that students who have spent too long trying to navigate the future mostly on their own deserve institutions willing to meet them halfway. Talent is everywhere. We say that often. But if we truly mean it, then we have to do more than admire rural students from a distance. We have to build systems that help them imagine more, reach farther, and believe that they are not merely eligible for opportunity, but genuinely welcomed into it. And that may be the most important part of the work. Programs like STARS do not simply help students discover colleges. They help close aspiration gaps by reminding young people in small towns and rural communities that ambitious futures are not reserved for somebody else. They are theirs to imagine, theirs to pursue, and with the right support, theirs to claim. A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.